So this is going to be a brief lecture about William James's 1904 piece, A World of Pure Experience. This is an article in which James is offering both psychology and philosophy what he calls radical empiricism. Radical empiricism is, James says, a mosaic philosophy. It stresses individual parts and elements while at the same time remaining mindful that everything that exists in relation to something else. It's an empirical philosophy. It's going to admit only and all of what is directly experienced by us, by you, by me, by all of us, especially, again, relations. It's going to rule out other philosophical approaches, such as those of the British empiricists, which would deny directly felt connections and conjunctions, which would add in unfelt or unexperienced connections, as the rationalists do, things like substances or trans-experiential agents, intellectual categories, or selves in some kind of self-enclosed substantial sense. So James is trying to find a way to provide empiricism with connection and conjunction without supernaturalism. Now, one important factor that James stresses is conjunctive relations. Conjunctive relations, James says, are the with, the and, that we encounter in experience. They're found in experience. They're all real. They show varying degrees of intimacy, connection, and inclusiveness. So what it means to be a self, what it means to be myself or you yourself, this is an outgrowth of the most intimate of these kinds of conjunctive relations. The relation that we experience between terms which forms our very states of mind. So James says, we find in ourselves that the continuous transitions of our mental life are definitely experienced, and so are the discontinuities. So, for example, I can't read your mind and you can't read mine. That is a discontinuity that we directly experience. So continuity for James is the experienced ground for our continuing identity. He says, quote, in a world where both the terms and their distinctions are affairs of experience, conjunctions that are experienced must at least be as real as anything else. So James's point here is that neither we nor the universe are necessarily connected or unified. There's no one single thread through either that is intimate and that's unified. So semi-chaos in our experience and in our world is more the rule than the exception. There are discrete elements. There are connections. There are even cores. And so what radical empiricism asks and answers are, is there disconnection found in our experience? Yes, that is real. Disconnection is real. Is there a core? Are there foci, right? Focuses? Yes. Those are also real. So if one considers other metaphysical distinctions, right, that philosophers have written about for hundreds and hundreds of years, continuity and sameness, discontinuity, separation, James notes that these are what they are as they are known by direct experience, through practical living. Right? If there is meaning in any of these ideas, it will be found in its ability to lead experience. Well, what about the cognitive relation? Radical empiricism will also dissolve the historically problematic relation between the knower or the subject on the one hand, the known and the object on the other. So the subject-object distinction is going to be dissolved. James says, in the bosom of finite experience, every conjunction required to make the relation intelligible is given in full. So this distinction that we make between knowing and known, between knower and known, is something which happens in experience. It's made of experience. Knower and known are experienced elements. And James offers the example in his piece of how he gets to Memorial Hall. And this is his attempt to explain what is meant by a name is not some reality that's transcendentally apart from us, to which our ideas sort of correspond, like an arrow leaving in here and going to out there. Our ideas help to lead us. They help us to continue our progress. They help to corroborate what other people say, all of this in experience. So James writes, and this is a great quote, he says, "In this continuing and corroborating, taken in no transcendental sense, but denoting definitely felt transitions, lies all that the knowing of a percept by an idea can possibly contain or signify." So keep in mind that not all ideas have this immediate leading function. Right? We possess within our experience the power of symbolism. We can abstract, we can generalize, we can substitute, we can use words in place of percepts. Right? We can say a cold glass. We can represent, right? We can use words to stand in for other words or other terms in a way that individual things cannot do. So we have all of these abilities without the paradox of wondering how things metaphysically leave our subjective realm of experience and hook up with the real world of physical things. Substitution is an important function that James discusses. So in experiential terms, what does substitution mean? What does it mean for a table, the word table, to substitute for the percept or the perception of a table? What James says is the term or word table fulfills a function in experience. Table leads to another experience. So if you say to me, "Where's the table?" and you use that spoken word, and I say the table is over there, those words are all ways of trying to get you in the presence of a percept that you desire. So the only experience that one experience can perform is to lead another experience. I know that sounds kind of convoluted, but saying a word is an experience, and walking into the other room is an experience, and having the sensation of the table is yet another experience. So James says the only fulfillment we can really speak of is that of reaching a certain experienced end. When one experience leads to or can lead to the same end as another, they agree in function. So words can substitute or function rapidly, they can function efficiently, they can function abstractly. And all of this is very useful because words display a lot of flexible and various connections. So overall, James's concept of pure experience is one that is embracing substitution as a function in experience, along with conjunctive transitions. And all of these can yield for us what we call the real world, in a very new and practical sense. Well, we should talk about objective reference, about things. Okay? How do we get a world objectively referenced or referred to? We've said that experience can reach beyond itself, right? That concepts are verified by the percept encountered. So they reach beyond themselves, but not in a metaphysical or transcendental sense. Like if I say, "I'll see you later," that's obviously reaching beyond the present moment to something else. But concepts, James says, are verified by the percept that are eventually encountered. Where are they encountered? What can this mean in a world of pure experience? So James says, let's distinguish between knowing as verified or confirmed and knowing as a process, and knowing in transit, virtual knowing. Most knowing, James says, is virtual knowing. I mean, we live on the credit system, he says. We live on virtual knowledge. We act on such knowledge. We act on verified knowledge, too. But the notion of knowledge which transcends itself is one in which that transcendence can be verified pragmatically. So all knowledge ultimately is tested in experience, somehow, somewhere, somewhen, by someone. Right? So James's idea of Memorial Hall is tested by me when I wind up standing in front of Memorial Hall. It all takes place in experience. Finally, James takes up the old problem of other minds, or as he calls it, the coterminousness of different minds. Minds can coexist without the traditional objections of how do I know you have a mind, and how do I know I'm not the only mind, and so forth. Because James is going to allow the supposition that we live in the same world. and this explains how we act together all the time. He says the experience of multiple contexts is real, and we can call this a pluriverse. So James is not going to allow the kind of hyperbolic doubt that stopped Descartes dead in his tracks, in his skeptical tracks until he brought in God, or that made Hume remain a skeptic at the end of his great work, The Treatise of Human Nature. So for James, there are certain things we can assume because they are directly experienced. It's not a proof in the traditional sense, but it allows us to verify and confirm and get on with our lives in a world of pure experience. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.